All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our class or experiential, whatever we want to call it, thing that we are doing about embodied spirituality. I'm going to share a screen with those of you who are watching online, so that way you can see some of the things that we are doing. Today we're going to not only have an introduction to the theme for our Lenten devotionals over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks. We're going to kind of explore a little bit about what that means, and then we are going to practice one of the spiritual practices, which is called the Examen. And the way that I think is good for us to engage in this first is just to look at the first question, which is our title, Embodied Spirituality. So the first question that I have is, what do you think of when you hear the word embodied?
You take an idea and make it into actual fact.
Okay, you take an idea and you make it fact, like you make it something that goes from up here in our brain, and then it is expressed in the quote unquote real world. Hello, Pat, come on in. And so, yes, that is one way of thinking about embodied. Here you go, Pat. I think embodied also, it talks about well, we'll get to the next bit here in a little bit. How about spirituality? What do you think about when you hear the word spirituality?
My opinion is rather negative because the way it is often used, I don't know if it means anything at all.
Yes, I think that's a fair critique, the way that spirituality is used within our modern context. Sometimes it feels very nebulous. It feels kind of, a lot of people use the word and it seems to mean different things to different people. And so, which is one of the reasons why that adjective beforehand of embodied is so important. One of the ways that I try to think about this in particular is that what embodied is we are created as human beings in the image of God, right? Body, mind, and soul. And embodied spirituality is, the way that I think about it, is this idea of making sure that our spiritual lives is not just up in the air, frou-frou, fancy pants thinking, but that it's grounded in our everyday lives. Because if what is happening with our lives between ourselves and God has nothing to do with what is happening around us, we have to really ask ourselves whether we are engaged with the God who comes to us in Jesus Christ as a full-bodied person. And so whatever we do spiritually, in essence, must also manifest itself physically within ourselves. Does that make sense? Sue, do you have...
Yeah, I would add that when I think of an embodied spirituality, I think of my whole self being involved in praise and worship and the experience of God. So I often think about the verse, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And I like to add with every fiber of your being.
Right.
So we experience God in so many ways.
Yes. I think the microphone caught that, but I'll just say that basically, Vicar Sue is sharing that when she thinks about this, it's being grounded in our whole being, that body, mind, soul. We experience God with all of our being, and that's what part of this is as well. So, as a way of, look at this. practices. So as a result, over the next couple weeks, what we're going to be doing is engaging in practices that engage the body, mind, and soul, our whole being. And so sometimes we'll be doing movement, we'll be looking at art, we'll be doing different exercises because we know and believe that God works and that we experience God with our whole being. And so trying to help ourselves be open to how God works in the world. And so today we're going to practice the Examen. This is, I have to say, one of my favorite forms, favorite. It is one of the most meaningful forms of spiritual engagement that I practice. It is something that was developed by St. Ignatius of Loyola, who was the founder of the Jesuit order within the Roman Catholic Church. This is slightly modified and kind of brought up to quote unquote modern day language and ways of thinking about this. But I think one of the things that needs to be mentioned and named is that in this, the core of this is that we have to do this practice or any of the practices that we are looking at doing with intentionality. And by that, what I really mean is, how many of you do exercise on occasion? Okay. If you don't do exercise, do you get stronger? No, of course not. If you do not pay attention to what you eat, is it easy to stay on track of what you're supposed to be eating? No, you have to be intentional. You have to be mindful. You have to be intentional about engaging in spiritual practices. Just like any muscle that we have, by participating and practicing spiritual practices, we become better at them. But they don't just happen. It takes practice. The more we engage, the more likely we are to be successful, although I'm not sure that's a great word to talk about spirituality. The more that we engage, the more we are to be faithful is probably a better way to say that. Whoever put these slides together needs to get his head on straight. So as we enter into the attitude of Examen, there are a couple of things that I think are helpful for us to pay attention to about how we enter into it. Because just as with any practice or anything that we can do, if we enter into it with the wrong spirit or the wrong expectations, we can do harm to ourselves. We can do harm between our relationship with God. If we see the Examen as just a way of beating up on ourselves, which like that has been something that people have done in the past, then that becomes a destructive element between ourselves and God. The focus of the Examen is about thankful reflection. It's about discernment of self. And part of that is recognizing that as we look at our day, we may not like to admit it, but we are human beings and we have emotions. Anybody notice that? Right. We have emotions. We are a messy tangle of emotions. And one of the things that the Examen can help us do is pay attention to those emotions and also can help us see where they lead us. You know, what are the emotions and the mindsets that lead us toward God, toward wholeness, toward health? What are the emotions that lead us away from God, that lead us towards brokenness, that lead us away from that which can make us whole? If I'm going to just use normal theological language, what leads us towards sin? What leads us towards righteousness? Those are the questions that we do as we start engaging in this. So there are 5 steps. They're listed on the screen that's there that you can see. And first, we're going to ask, the first stage of this is that we're going to ask for help to see clearly. Because how many of us have discovered that we have lied to ourselves about something? Right? And we deceive ourselves, and we do it with regularity. And so the purpose, the starting point, is to acknowledge, God, I need help to see clearly. That's step number one as we start engaging in this. Step number two is for us to give thanks. Our lives are a gift that God has given to us. God gave us Jesus Christ. So our body, mind, and soul, all that we have that helps us experience both the joy and pain of living, they are gifts. And so approaching God with an attitude of thanksgiving is appropriate, and it's always good to say thank you, right? It helps set a frame for ourselves as we begin this process. So the third step is reviewing your day, and this tends to be where the majority of the time of this prayer and this discipline is spent. And sometimes people do it in a variety of ways. Like they'll have these questions. Whoops, that didn't do the thing that I wanted it to do. Yes, okay. So the thing that we want to make sure happens is that when we review our day, we ask ourselves questions. And you'll notice that the questions that we're called, that are helpful to ask, is not, was I a good person or a bad person, right? The question is, how have I been in relationship with God? Because one of the core foundations of these questions is that how I treat other people is actually how I treat God. It takes seriously the idea that God tells us that if there are those who are poor or who are suffering, that is where Jesus is. And so, however, what we experience in the presence is how we are drawn to God, how we are responding to God. And there's also the hard question of, question number 3 here, is there a part of my life that's still untouched by Jesus Christ and where he is calling me to a change of heart? I don't know about you, but I can immediately name several places where not only I'm not sure I've given all of that over to God yet, but I'm not sure I want to. But if we are not able to name that and admit it, then we are not able to begin really thinking about what that means for our lives. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. And as we review the day, one of the things that I have found very helpful is that I start just thinking each hour because of the day, and I look at so for instance, I woke up at about 6:30 this morning. And then I just spend some time thinking, okay, what did I do during this time? How did I react? What were some things that I did as I was waking up to either start my day with God, or that just kind of helped me shut down? And do that hour by hour throughout the day. Asking some of these questions that we have here. Now, the reality is that if you ask these kinds of questions, you may come to some unpleasant realizations about yourself, right? There are going to be shortcomings that we engage in, and we have to name it, we have to accept it, but then we also have to hold true to a core and just essential element of the Examen. We exist by God's grace in a state of grace. We are constantly being forgiven. It doesn't mean that we don't try to improve where we are, but we don't stay in the place of judgment where we just just beat ourselves up. If there's something that we need to beat ourselves up about, maybe that means that there's something that we need to do the next day, to try to either mend a relationship or affirm that you could do something different. But God doesn't demand that we just roll around in our shortcomings. God says, I am here for you. I am on your side. You are forgiven. And then that leads us to hope for tomorrow, which is the last stage of this. We've met our shortcomings. We've recognized that we are forgiven by God. And it can be tempting to cling to any shortcomings that we have and just let that drag us down, particularly if you're kind of tired and grumpy at the end of your day. What we are reminded of and what we go to bed with is this idea that tomorrow is a new day full of new possibilities to experience God's grace, to share God's love, and to rely on God in new ways for the day to come. Okay, so that's the process. That's kind of how we go through this. Are there any questions about this? So if not, I just want to, we're going to just try and engage in this practice together right now. And what I'll do is that I'll guide us through this. And we are not going to do, as you'll see, the practice tends to take 15 to 20 minutes. But normally, this is something that you do at the end of your day, as you reflect back on your day. I would say that since it's only 11 o'clock, I don't think that we need to do this for the full 15 minutes. So I'm going to set a timer in my mind. And what I'll do is just say, I'll just kind of go stage by stage through each of the processes. And this is something that you do in silence. This is your own personal meditation and reflection. This is time for you to be with God, time for you to be with yourself, who you truly are and who you want to be. So let's go ahead and begin. One of the ways that I think is good for everyone to begin with is get comfortable, get your feet settled in yourself. Make sure that you are loose and just kind of take a deep breath in. And then and then let that out slowly. Take another deep breath in. And then let that breath out slowly. And as you breathe in the light of God. And as you breathe out that which is separating you from God. Friends, let us spend some time asking for God's help as we seek to see ourselves clearly. And let us take a few moments and give thanks to God for this day. Now, friends, let us begin our journey throughout our day. How were you as you woke up to greet the new day? As you broke your fast this morning, how were you as you greeted and took your first steps in relationship with those who are around you? How have you been engaged with the heart of God as you have engaged with those who are around you? And how have you been as you entered into this space and this time? And so now in this moment, as you have reflected upon your day, what are the things where you have not met and did not respond to God's love and let God's love work within you? Be mindful that God's grace is still working within you, and that you are upheld and loved by God's gracious nature. Tomorrow, or the rest of the day, is still ahead of you, with opportunities to share God's love, with opportunities to live into who God is calling you to be. Let us ask God for God's grace to meet us wherever we are. Amen. Now, friends, I invite you to take another deep breath in and let it out. Take another deep breath in and let it out. And come back to this space. So I'm curious, I wonder, how was that for you? Was that something that was challenging? Was that something that was hard? Was it easy? How do you feel?
Take a while to figure out what we're doing.
It takes a while to figure out what you are doing. Yes, and that is a wonderful and honest response, because as I said at the beginning, to engage in spiritual practices is to engage in a type of exercise. The more that you do it, the more adept you become at it. The more that you do it, I will just simply say that for myself, this has been, this practice helps ground me. It helps me be more mindful of my relationships with those around me. And it helps me feel closer to God. And so I commend this to you.
I am grateful for your partnership in this practice, Jason. I did not have as good of an experience as I had this morning, because as I was engaging God, I realized I was engaging the wrong text for Sunday. So to be able to come in here and sit and just be with God without any other worries on my mind, to take a look inwardly, was helpful.
Good.
So I would encourage people to do this with other people initially as you practice this.
Actually, I think being able to engage in this with other people is very helpful. Yes. And so if you're able to find some people to do that with, and you know what, you've got like 2 pastors who work in this building who we do this. Yes. The other thing, if you are curious about this and want to learn more, there is a website here that has a lot of really excellent information, and a lot of the things that I used came from that. There's also an app for this, because there's an app for everything. And there's an app that's called Reimagining the Examen that is excellent. I have found that to be a wonderful tool. I commend that to anyone who is interested in seeing this and doing this. It's wonderful. And if you need help downloading an app, I'm happy to help with that as well. As we end, I'd like to end, if you don't mind, by just saying the Lord's Prayer together. So let us join, and whatever version you know, use, because that's who we are. Let us join together in the Lord's Prayer. Yes, please stand. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. As we go from this place, go in peace, love the Lord. It was good to be with you today.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Have a wonderful day, everyone.